I very much am honored to be introducing our presenters today. Karen Brofft is a Professional Development Associate with the Leadership and Learning Center. She serves also as the Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services and Communications for Englewood Schools in Colorado. She has spent over 20 years in Douglas County School District, serving in a variety of teaching, administrative, and teaching leadership roles. As a principal, and later as the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment, Karen implemented successful building and system-wide professional learning communities using data and results as a cornerstone for measuring success. Kim Marshall, who is our special guest today, was a teacher, central office administrator, and principal in the Boston Public Schools for 32 years. He now advises and coaches new principals working with new leaders for new schools, teaches courses and workshops on instructional leadership, and publishes a weekly newsletter, the Marshall Memo, of which many of you may be familiar, which summarizes ideas and research from 44 publications. Kim has also written several books and numerous articles on teaching and school leadership. Mona Yoast, who is the Leadership and Learning Center's Executive Director, is a passionate educator who brings years of experience as a classroom teacher, reading specialist, instructional coach, national professional development consultant, and has held leadership positions in several national professional development firms. And I am very pleased to now turn the webinar over to Mona, who will begin now. Thank you, Mona.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I'm honored to be here today in the company of Kim and Karen to talk about this really important topic of teacher and leader evaluation. So to get us warmed up to discuss this topic a little more in depth, I'm inviting you to read this quote, and in just a second I'm going to ask you to react to it. Okay, hopefully you've had a minute to digest Mike Schmoker's message to us there. And now is the time for the reaction. So if we can move to the poll. So after reading that statement, to what extent do you agree with what Mike Schmoker is telling us there? So you're going to use your poll function and choose whether you agree, are you sort of neutral, do you strongly disagree? Go ahead and show us your response.
And now you should be seeing the results.
Look at that. Even more strongly opinionated than I would have expected. Thank you so much for your responses there. So if we can go back to the slideshow, Kathy, I think you will find the people that you are hearing from today in this meeting are very, very much like-minded. We feel strongly that to be better at what we do, we need to move away from evaluation as that one shot in time, that one formal evaluation where the administrator sits in the back of the room for teachers, watches an entire lesson, writes down everything they did, and then the teacher gets this very lengthy report back telling them everything that they did. I know when I was in that spot, oftentimes I felt like, you know what, I know that this is what I did because I did it. Give me some more meaningful feedback. So we really want to move away from evaluation in that one-time formal process more to evaluation more as a form of professional development. So if you look on the next slide, you'll see really we're looking at something that's more of a series of ongoing conversations between an administrator and the teacher. Kathy, if you can go ahead and advance that. Thanks. So it's really more of an integral part of a teacher's ongoing job-embedded professional development, not just that one shot in time. So at the Leadership and Learning Center, we really look at evaluation as professional development that is really bound around what we call the formative process. So on the next slide, you'll see what we're talking about when we say the formative process. So it starts with ongoing observation of teaching and learning of effective leadership practices, facilitating the conversation to reflect on what was observed, build some goals into a professional growth plan that will be visited frequently, and there'll be more ongoing observation with formative feedback. So it really becomes not an evaluation model, but more of a growth model. And that's what we're really excited to bring into schools and districts. So if we were to map out the Leadership and Learning Center and what we say the model of effective teacher evaluation is, we've got it mapped out for you on the next slide. So first, let's look at what it would look like for teachers. We feel very strongly that instead of a one-time formal observation that takes tons of administrator time sitting through an entire lesson after having done the pre-observation conference and then the post-observation conference, that we can really do a more effective job of doing multiple, what you'll hear Kim talk about, mini observations throughout the school year. Take much less administrator time, but what the administrator is doing is collecting multiple snapshots in time instead of doing that one formal portrait at the end of the year. And then all of the reflections and the feedback are grounded in a rubric, or really what we would call a continuum of effective practices. So the feedback is anchored to something. And then the administrator is also pulling in, working with individual teachers, group of teachers, looking at how are these teachers working together to really be architects of effective instruction, to look at the units of study that they're designing, and then work with teachers in data teams and look at what data teams do is monitor how students performed as a result of their instruction. So we've got multiple sources of information so that when it is time to do that end of the year formal evaluation, if you will, we've got multiple snapshots in time, multiple points of information, so we know it's a much more effective practice, it's ongoing, and it truly becomes part of a teacher's professional growth plan that is touched upon all throughout the year. Now, if you look at the next slide, you'll see that what we advocate for leadership evaluation is extremely similar, same concepts. So we advocate that district leaders do frequent building visits. So they're not just going in and doing a formal observation of leadership practices. So that they're taking those multiple snapshots in time instead of just that one portrait. But that during that time, they're giving feedback to the leader, and again, it's grounded in some sort of a rubric, a measurement tool that provides that continuum of effective learning. So it's not just the anchor for ongoing feedback, but also will be the anchor for that end of year formal evaluation that will come at the end of the year. But we want them to look at other data points as well. How is the building being led to really utilize the district curriculum units to plan their instruction that's targeted at student needs? Pulling data from a building level data team. How are we doing as a grade level? How are you doing as a school? And using all of that information again to provide a multifaceted approach to leader evaluation that really becomes not just an evaluation, but ongoing leadership development and growth. So I think some of the benefits to this kind of a model are clear, but I wanted to highlight just a few. If we could go forward, Kathy. So we're really looking at this as a growth system and not just an evaluation system. And really the hallmarks that make this so powerful are using the multiple points of information, taking snapshots over multiple amounts of time, using ongoing feedback, not just feedback delivered once or twice a year. And a couple more points on the next slide. Really, it promotes collaboration. We're working together as educators to continually get better at what we do and improve our practice. It's grounded in student data and truly becomes a part of professional development for the teacher, for the school leader, and as a Leadership and Learning Center, we know that this isn't always easy to implement. We know it's good. We know it's better than some of the more traditional methods, but we also know it's difficult to implement. So as your partner, we also offer the professional development around switching the way we look at teacher evaluation, the way we go about doing it, and the implementation support. So when you want to move to more of these types of approaches, we can help you be successful doing it. So we're going to hear from our other members on this panel in just a second, but before I turn it over to them, we wanted to learn a little bit more about you and the audience that we're specifically speaking to today. So we have a couple of more polls so we can learn a little bit more about you, and we go in to listen to Kim and Karen. They'll be able to tailor the answers to the questions that I'll be asking them specifically to who we have on the webinar today. So first, what does your state require? Is it one that there has to be at least one announced formal observation, because we know that that's prevalent, that has to be conducted, documented annually, or do you have a little more flexibility? So let's do this first poll question, yes or no. Pretty much what we anticipated, so this should provide for some very interesting conversation when we open it up for question and answer, because looking at your opinions earlier on of what you felt about Mike Schmoker's statement, however, many of you do have that one formal evaluation that has to be done. Kind of a quandary, but good meat for conversation as we go through the rest of the meeting. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So if you would rate your school district, your present situation right now on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 representing that much more multidimensional approach that I talked about just a moment ago, using multiple points of data, multiple snapshots over time, whereas 1 being more that very formal process, happens once a year, or anywhere in between. So rank your school or your district or your present situation on that scale of 1 to 5. Again, 5 being the very multidimensional, lots of mini observations, lots of sources of information, 1 being that very, very traditional, one formal required observation or evaluation a year. Interesting bell curve there. Great. So, I mean, we have lots of different scenarios, and just the one comment that you read, Kathy, I think a lot of districts are trying to use more of a hybrid approach and move in this direction, so that they meet their requirement, but also are providing that really beneficial ongoing feedback to teachers and leaders as well. So if we move on to the last poll question, and then we're going to open it up to our other 2 presenters. All of you in your role as educators have had evaluation experiences, and some of them hopefully you've experienced are very effective, and you've probably experienced some that aren't quite as effective as you would have liked. So if you think about the effective experiences you've had of feedback, evaluation, what were the features of the system or practice? What rose to the top as most effective? See if you can choose something from the list here. What would you say is a feature that would have made it most effective? Great. Focusing on continuous improvement. I love it. It really becomes a part of that professional growth plan. 2-way feedback encouraged. Wonderful. Specific criteria, kind of that anchor that I talked about. Very good. Well, so now that we've learned a little bit more about you, we're going to talk to Kim about teacher evaluation and get his take, and also talk to Karen and her opinions and expertise in leadership evaluation. So Kim, this first series of questions is for you, and we're very anxious to hear your responses. So as a result of your experiences and research, what have you learned about the most effective way to conduct teacher observations?
Well, I think the first thing is we really have to take the plunge and move away from this ineffective model that Mike Schmoker so articulately said was not working, where evaluations are infrequent, full lesson, very elaborate feedback, and very infrequent. Just once or twice a year. The whole process is very formal. Moving away from that to the exact opposite of that, of evaluations that are unannounced, that are frequent, and my criterion for frequent is 10 per teacher per year, and short. The only way you can do that many observations of teachers is short. And a lot of people, when I talk to principals about this, they think, gosh, that sounds like an awful lot, 10 per teacher per year. But in fact, in most buildings, in almost all school buildings, I do polls of this when I talk to principals, it comes down to about 2 many observations a day. And if those are in the range of 10 minutes, that seems to be the amount of time that most people feel is enough to get a grasp of what's going on in the classroom. And if they're followed up, and we'll talk about this in the next question, if they're followed up by really good feedback conversations, then it really turns out that this, done 10 times a year, is a very effective way of getting into classrooms, getting past the dog and pony show, seeing what's really happening in classrooms on a regular basis, and getting teachers to the point where they're comfortable and students where they're comfortable and really don't even notice the administrator coming in because they're in so frequently, and really sort of do what they're regularly doing. The principal sees terrific instruction, sees solid instruction, occasionally sees things that need some correction or improvement, and then talks to the teacher about it afterward. There, you're really beginning to get an authentic sense of what's going on. You're in enough so that teachers are comfortable and really are open and trust the system, whereas everyone kind of knows that the existing system is kind of bogus, and that came out very clearly in Mike Schmoker's comment. Getting to a situation where principals are seeing what's really going on, talking frequently about it, and the main point of today's webinar really is giving authentic feedback that is part of a teacher's ongoing development and growth.
Excellent. So you've already kind of tipped the hat to question number 2, which is really around feedback. And I know you feel that feedback, Kim, is extremely important. So how should a principal ensure that quality feedback is an integral part of the teacher evaluation process?
Well, that's where I think a lot of administrators are kind of going off in a direction that I think is not very productive. I have an article in this week's Education Week about this, about people bringing in laptops and iPads and checklists and recording all kinds of quantitative information about what's going on. And I feel very strongly that the important thing is to walk around the classroom, really smell the roses, look at what students are doing, chat with a couple of kids, and really sort of focus in those 10 minutes on what's really going on and what are the 1 or 2 things. But then, in terms of the feedback, really talking face-to-face with the teacher, ideally within 24 hours of ideally the same day, and ideally in the teacher's classroom when children are not there, so that you're really in the moment on the teacher's turf. The teacher's much more comfortable with that, and sharing, what are those 1 or 2 sort of what Paul Bambrick-Santoyo calls the changed levers. What are the things that the teacher would most benefit from hearing, both in terms of praise and affirmation of good things that are going on, questions about things that might be improved, and sometimes outright criticism. Sometimes you really need to give more wait time, or you really need to take that edge of sarcasm off your voice, because I see kids flinching at that. But having an honest two-way conversation, I think the most important thing is that it be two-way. It isn't just the administrator sort of giving this data dump to the teacher. It's really saying, well, I was there for 10 minutes. Here's what struck me. Let's talk about that. What's your reaction to that? And the teacher invariably has new information that the administrator doesn't know. What happened before you came in, why that girl's head is down, because her father's in the hospital, and I'm allowing that to happen. Really sort of giving the teacher a chance to fill in the broader picture, because the administrator is missing a huge amount with these mini observations, and yet you are seeing authentic instruction. You're seeing what's going on. These conversations I found, and I do them many, many times. I was just in a classroom in New York City in Spanish Harlem yesterday morning with the principal, watching carefully, coming out, and then really talking, what's the conversation going to look like? What's the teacher's reaction going to be? How are you going to say this in a way the teacher can hear and really contribute to a growth experience for the teacher? And, by the way, for the principal as well, because you're learning all the time, too.
Kim, I'd like to ask you, well, one is actually a comment, and another is a question, but I think first a comment, and that is by Amy, who says, in her district, we were required to do 5 formal observations per new teacher in 2 3-week intervals. I always had a pre-conference observation and a post-conference, and did many evaluations, and they were all qualitative in nature, and I used a laptop to record what I was seeing in narrative format.
So a lot of districts are doing this. They haven't been willing to take the plunge of moving away from the bogus, really ineffective full lesson formal observation. And my advice to people who are caught in that, and this includes a lot of principals in New York City where I'm doing a lot of work, is it's actually not required by union contracts and often not by the district to write a 4-page narrative. What is required, perhaps, is getting in for a full lesson observation. My advice to folks who are caught in that vice, and it really is, most people know that this is a huge time management issue. If you're going to have to spend 4 or 5 hours per teacher. Actually, I was talking to someone in Fairfax, Virginia a couple of weeks ago who said it was actually a 10-hour process per teacher by the time you've done all the components and done this lengthy write-up. So my advice is give it a haircut. Okay, so you go in for the full lesson, fine, you have to do that. But then summarize the 1 or 2 key points, talk to the teacher face-to-face, give the feedback, have the conversation, and then wrap it up in a very brief, like 1 paragraph piece of closure about what needs to change or what is going really well. So cutting a 10 or a 5 or 10 hour process down into less than a 1 hour process. Then you can get to the crucial thing, which is frequency and authenticity. Then you can really get in a lot. So that's my suggestion to someone caught in that situation. I don't know if that'll be helpful to her.
And then the question in it may, in fact, be somewhat already responded to, but Rebecca asks if you feel that the mini observations can take the place of the 3 to 5 minute walkthroughs.
So the 3 to 5 minute walkthrough. So I wish I could talk directly to her. So I mean, a walkthrough might be a quick superficial tour of the building, in which case you wouldn't have enough information to really talk to the teacher about. But I find the threshold for a mini observation is about 5 minutes, minimum of 5 minutes. But really sort of getting in, smelling the roses, not taking a huge amount of notes on the laptop, really sort of walking around. Again, it's crucial to look at the students' work. What is it that they're doing? What's the instructional task? How rigorous is it? How appropriate is it? What's the teacher doing? Checking with a couple of kids, asking questions like, what are you working on? But back to her question, I really think that mini observations, if done in sufficient quantity, I think 10 per teacher per year is a good number, can really replace the formals and can in fact provide much better information. A clicker question that I ask in all my presentations is, which gives the principal better information for the end of the year evaluation, more authentic, more valid information? And I give people 2 choices. One is a couple of formal, full lesson with full write-up and pre and post, or 10 mini observations with face-to-face feedback and then a quick closure paragraph. And usually I get a unanimous response. Like every single person says that the mini observations are more authentic, more accurate, and more valid in terms of teacher evaluation.
Great. And then Carol asks a question, but I believe, Mona, when you pose the next question to Kim, it will be answered. So there we go.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Kim, we know a lot of times we work with administrators and they get this in concept, but the frustration is, where do I find the time? And this next question really reflects that. What advice do you have for principals that know it's important to be visiting classrooms and doing these mini observations, knowing it's important to visit teachers when they're working in collaborative teams or using the data teams process? They know that that's important, but how do they fit it in the school day?
So I was a principal in Boston, a regular Boston public school for 15 years, and I battled with my time management challenge every single day. At one point, someone observed me with a clipboard and a stopwatch and found that I had 200 interactions in the course of the day, and that did not include saying hello to kids in the corridor. So the principalship is an unbelievably busy and demanding job, and fitting these mini observations in is always a challenge. So I think the 2 things that are really crucial here are, first of all, keeping them short. And getting them down to 10 minutes is most people's consensus. 10 minutes is enough to get a real good sense of what's going on. And secondly, having a target number. So I invite principals to do the math. How many teachers do you have? And do the math of, okay, if you did 10 per teacher per year, what would that come down to per day? And as I said earlier, virtually always it's 2 a day, sometimes 3, but very rarely more than 3, because especially people divide it up among assistant principals, department heads, and so forth. So 2 a day is actually 2 10-minute observations a day is doable. You're going to have days you're going to do 0. You're pulled out, you have a crisis, you have an angry parent, out of control child, whatever it is, or some bureaucratic responsibility. But if you push yourself to do 2 a day, and if you make that what the time management people call your big rock, your big rock every day is to do 2 a day. If you push yourself to do that, and if you make it your business to do that, and if you understand that it's a high priority, then it is doable. And I talk to principals all around the country who, when they get that mindset, short and sweet, face-to-face feedback, those conversations are short also. They're in the order of 5 minutes. Having a target per day, pushing yourself, understanding there are going to be bad days, but pushing yourself. By the way, I would never advise doing more than 5 a day. I sometimes did 5, and that's very demanding in terms of fitting it in, but also in terms of fitting in the conversations, which are the essence of the whole process. So with those, and this is where the superintendent comes in, or the principal's boss, is they've got to be supportive. They've got to be constantly checking in and holding principals accountable. They've got to walk around with principals, look in on classrooms, seeing how it's going, getting a sense of does the principal have a good eye for what's going on in classrooms? Are they seeing the right things? But also, for the superintendent, the most important thing is taking other stuff off the table. Doug Reeves always says, if you're putting something new on the table, you have to take something off the table. And I think the biggest thing the superintendent can take off the table is the traditional dog and pony show, extremely time-consuming process, because once that's taken off, then this becomes much more doable.
Great.
And the questions are coming in fast and furious. I'm sorry, Mona. I was just saying the questions are coming in fast and furious, and I'm just going to pose one or two others, and then perhaps at the end, if we have time, we can go back and answer some of these. Otherwise, please know that we will be responding to you afterward via email to any questions that we have not been able to answer. But Trish asks, when you do the mini observation write-up, do you use the CEU format on the short paragraph following the face-to-face feedback session?
So my recommendation is keeping it to a very, very short format. And I would not suggest a checklist format. I would suggest prose. So you've talked to the teacher, you've said, you know, what I'm really concerned about is you're not allowing enough wait time and you're rushing on to the next kid, and I really want you to slow down, give a little more wait time, let these kids respond, don't let other kids butt in, you know, and call out the answer, and I want you to work on that, and that's what I'm going to be looking at next time. And that can be summed up, you know, then you hear from the teacher, you go back and forth and so forth. They're worried about management, they're worried about pacing, getting through the curriculum, you have that dialogue, and then the very short paragraph just sums up, as we said in our conversation. You know, this is what I think you can work on, can improve. And just, you know, there's one software product that allows the principal 1,000 characters to give the feedback. And it's a very clever device in this software package because, you know, then it really limits you. You've got to make your point. And the fact is the teacher can't absorb more than 1 or 2 points. I mean, you should not be making 15 points. Just 1 or 2 change levers. What is this principal, what is this teacher doing well, effectively? You know, what can they improve? You know, then you really begin to get some impact and some growth in teachers.
Thank you, Kim.
All right, are we ready to move on, Kathy?
Well, we have a lot of questions, but I'll reserve those and we'll revisit them, but we certainly want to have Karen have her time as well.
Absolutely. You know, you heard Kim talk about the importance of the district level support for the administrators to be able to do this well. And, you know, it's a perfect segue into talking to Karen about leadership evaluation. And we've seen a lot of emphasis in the last few years across the United States on teacher effectiveness, but also now much more in the forefront leadership effectiveness. So Karen, what do you see as the big concerns with regard to how leaders have been evaluated in the past, and what do you see as needing to change?
I'm really happy to talk about this because I know it's on the forefront of everyone's mind. I know in our district we've spent a lot of time addressing this concept of educator effectiveness because of the demands, not only from the state but across the country, and thinking about all those states that are involved in Race to the Top. This is a big part of that. And I think that what we see is kind of a perfect storm right now in terms of leadership evaluation. In the past, not as much attention went to the leaders. You know, we maybe spent a little bit more time focusing on the classroom and what was happening there, and not necessarily on building the capacity in our leaders to be able to be instructional leaders. And we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, in a minute about how that connects to Kim's comments. But I think what we saw as we did some research and other folks did research across the country is that generally leadership evaluations in the past were flawed. They were often binary, a yes, no, you're satisfactory or you're not. Many times, I think 18% of leaders reported they were never evaluated when the study was conducted across the country. And so obviously we have a bit of a crisis. More attention is now been paid to it recently, not just because of the educator effectiveness, but also because people are realizing the impact a leader can have. You know, definitely the teacher has the greatest impact, they're the closest to the kids, but what we now know from research is that the principal is second only to the teacher in terms of their impact on student achievement. You know, I think that if we look at the reasons why we need a new evaluation system or look to a different way of evaluating our leaders, We think about most evaluations in the past, I think 47% from that same survey said that they weren't even related to student achievement results. And so that's a problem if we're not even relating our leader evaluations to student achievement and to what's happening in the classroom. And then there's the issue of specificity and knowing how to change. I think oftentimes it was a pat on the back, you're doing a great job, you're keeping the parents from calling, central office, so great work. And I think that we need to be more specific. We need to build instructional leadership capacity. And I love Kim's book, and I've actually used it a lot with principals in my district. And I've also used it as I've presented across the country around leadership evaluation, because it really does set up the principle for success in what's important. And so this focus on leadership evaluation is great, because we have an opportunity to really reform and change what's happening with regard to how we evaluate our leaders.
Great, Karen. Looking at the next question, with this increased emphasis, a lot of districts are right where you just described, looking for a better way. So what do you say are the key characteristics they need to make sure are included as they're changing and evolving their leadership evaluation systems?
Well, it's interesting, as I kind of jotted down some of your poll results from the group out there, and I think the two top answers were two-way feedback and continuous improvement. One was 34 and one was 36%. And those are definitely critical aspects of a good evaluation system. Much like Kim talked about with regard to feedback for teacher evaluation, the same is true for principals. It needs to be specific. One of the things that we often see, again, is not specificity. And you keep talking about instructional leadership, but what does that really mean? I need some support and feedback to help describe that. So when we talk about what makes an effective evaluation system for leaders, we're talking about some key concepts. It needs to be proactive. In other words, it needs to be setting the stage for success, not reactive. It needs to clearly describe through specific criteria what's expected, and needs to provide information about how to get support to help you be more effective in that role. Needs to empower that leader to be able to make some local decisions with guidance from the district level. And it can't just be about a one-way, you need to do this, we expect you to do this. It needs to be a two-way feedback system where I, as a leader, give just as much feedback to the system as a principal leader as the system gives feedback to me. And then the other piece is truthful and objective. And I think that we're all educators, and it's really important that we make people feel good about the work they're doing, and we definitely want to be, supportive and positive and all those things, but we also need to be truthful, and as Kim mentioned, very specific about what needs to happen. When John Hattie talks about the power of feedback, he really talks about this concept of separating that good job feedback from this is what you need to do next feedback. The same thing needs to happen with our leaders so that they know what steps to take next. And that means, though, that our district office needs to be in those schools working with principals and know what's going on so they can give specific feedback.
Great. Karen, you mentioned the criteria, so obviously specific things that are leadership practices that we know are effective. And school leaders, there's, just as Kim talked about, there's such a demand on their time. So if I'm supporting a principal, I certainly want to prioritize my feedback, my support for them, help prioritize their time around the leadership practices that have the greatest impact on student achievement. So what are those areas would you suggest that should get the priority and the most focus?
Well, the great thing is, as I mentioned, we have some great research to look to now, because more attention has been focused in this area. I mentioned Hattie. I also think his work aligns with Vivian Robinson's work in this area, and both of them, worded a little bit differently, but both of them have identified 5 practices that are the highest yield in terms of instructional leadership that are going to get the most gains in terms of student achievement. And just to be very specific, those are promoting and participating in teacher professional development. That means not just providing the professional development and leaving the room. That means participating and staying there and working with teachers and engaging in the same learning that they're doing. It means being actively involved in making sure that teachers have the correct professional development opportunities to move them forward. Not just one-time sit and get, but ongoing support and feedback, as we mentioned before. And then the next key features is this idea of planning and evaluating the teaching and the curriculum. That's exactly what Kim's referring to when we talk about those frequent observations and having time to spend time in the classroom and evaluate what's happening and match resources to what you see when you're in the classroom observing teachers, when you identify what those needs are. Strategic resourcing is a part of that. And then establishing goals and expectations. If we don't know where we're going, you know, as a school and as a district, and if we're not clear about that vision and those goals, it's very difficult for people to get on board and understand what needs to happen next to move ourselves forward. And then finally, making sure we have that orderly and safe environment, because obviously if we don't have that in place, it's going to be difficult to achieve those goals that we want to achieve. And really the highest of those in terms of impact is leading teacher learning and development. And that's, like I said, not just the one-time sit and get, provide that, and the teachers are good. That's ongoing support and conversations and feedback.
Great. Karen, I think learning about our audience today, we realize they agree with these principles. They want to move more and more in this direction when it comes to supporting their teachers and school leaders. So on the next slide, you've actually assembled for us some tips to help us move in that direction.
Yes, and I hope that Kim will join in here as he sees some other things as well. I think that critical to this, especially given what's happening with educator effectiveness across the country, is we really need to take a look at our existing evaluation systems and determine if they do provide that opportunity for ongoing feedback, for real-time work in the classrooms. You know, I think about one of the major things we did with our own evaluation system was really start to look at this concept of this, even though the state does require that one-time formal observation, what do we do to make sure we provide support to our leaders and our teachers all year long through smaller, shorter opportunities and visits? It's critical that, as Kim mentioned, the superintendent or the director of schools or whoever supervises principals to get into those classrooms with the principals and make sure that they have conversations about, well, what did you see? What would you say? Is this an example of a high-yield strategy? So that we build this understanding together. So we need to look at our evaluation systems and make sure that those opportunities are in place. And it ties directly to that idea of continuous growth, which is that next bullet point. Effective feedback, making sure our curriculum is rigorous, making sure we have a good, solid professional learning community in place that's data-driven, and that we're observing that as well together. One of the things we do is encourage you to, if you've got data teams or another PLC structure where where teachers are looking at data together, that principals and superintendents and everyone get in there and watch those processes and give feedback and become a collaborative community around that work. And then critical, as you know, we know that principals are very busy, central office folks are very busy. We've got to have time management practices that prioritize and put what's important in front of us. We have to weed the garden, as Doug Reeves mentions, and we have to make sure that we're not expecting a lot of things that we know don't yield effective practice and higher student achievement for our principals and for our teachers.
Excellent.
And then the next steps, these are just really tied exactly, directly to those tips I just gave, but I think the most important thing that could come away from this webinar today is an opportunity to sit down with your team and really have some time to discuss. Let's look at our evaluation system. Do we think that this supports this? If it doesn't, what is required by our state, and how do we still have the opportunity for some massaging of that evaluation system so we can implement these best practices while still remaining compliant to what's expected for us by the state? I think that districts all across the country, even in those Race to the Top districts where, we've spent a lot of time in Florida, working with Florida on Race to the Top, they've figured out how to make this work. So it's ongoing, consistent opportunities for feedback, yet they're still meeting the demands of what's required by the state. And then, so how will you ensure that you have a multidimensional evaluation system based on your review? How will you make sure you have those opportunities? How will you make sure you're looking for those key indicators that would let you know that you're successful at moving your principals forward with regard to instructional leadership, that you're successful moving teachers forward with regard to effective use of high-yield strategies and practices, and looking at data and making inferences from student work and matching strategies to inferences. All of those things need to be embedded in what you're expecting from your evaluation systems. And then what steps are you going to take in the next month to make sure that these changes happen? Because what we know is, what we do in the next month is really going to impact what we will ultimately do in the future. So I would really encourage you to take that challenge of sitting down with your team and deciding what your next steps are and taking that first step.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. And being sensitive to everybody's time, we have reached the magic 3/4 hour here. That we do have other questions which we could not get to, but as I mentioned earlier, we do promise that we, via return email, will respond to each of your questions that we have not been able to get to as well. And also just to know that, and many of you are saying, is the recording available? And once again, it is on our website, www.leadandlearn.com. Go to the Resource Center up in the upper bar, and you will see webinars there. This will be available to you within the next 48 hours. I very much would like to thank Mona, Kim, and Karen today for an exceptional webinar and time with you all. We hope that we always welcome ongoing conversations. Please join us at the events which we had outlined in the beginning, where Dr. John Hattie will be featured, the Effective Grading Practices Summit, the 90-90-90 School Summit, and the Visible Learning Institute, all in Phoenix, Arizona, coming up in December. Additionally, resources, as we've mentioned earlier, the Reflective Leader and Rethinking Teacher Supervision and Evaluation are all available to you also on our website for purchase and for follow-up afterward as well. If you would take a few moments in your question function, once again, any topics that you would like to see in future webinars, we really do try to respond to your needs and to respond to your challenges as well, and be able to help supply some tools for future use in your classrooms and in your districts. Once again, the emails for our presenters are reflected here, as well as Kyle, our National Sales Manager. If you would like to bring any of our presenters on site, please write Kyle. You can write our presenters personally as well, and they will respond to you. And terrific responses today, terrific attentiveness. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Once again, Mona, Kim, and Karen, is there anything in closing that either of you have to say? I'll give you a moment for that if you'd like.
Just, this is Kim, just one quick thing. I think we will always want to keep our eye on the fact that teachers learn most from other teachers, and that a really important part of the principal's and the superintendent's job is to orchestrate those meetings where teachers get together to plan curriculum units, units of study, and also to look at student achievement during the year and really talk about what's working, what isn't working. That I think the research is saying, are two of the richest parts of teacher development. And the leader's job is, of course, to observe that occasionally, but mostly to orchestrate it so it happens.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
And I just would say thanks for the opportunity for everyone for calling in and talking about this, because I do think, you know, together we need to create systems that are more sensical in terms of how we develop our leaders and our teachers. So this is a great first step.
Thank you all.